Hello, welcome back. I'd like to start this video with a little bit of an embarrassing admission. I don't know why it's embarrassing, but for some reason I find it a little bit embarrassing. And that's the fact that despite the laptop or computer being the heart of most recording studios these days, with a lot of producers and music professionals doing stuff entirely in the box, so using pretty much just the computer to produce music. So with that in mind, I've been using the same laptop to produce music for around 7 years now. And although I keep saving up a bit of money and putting some money aside, thinking it's only a matter of time until it gives up and I'm going to need a new machine and to splash quite a bit of cash on something, then it just keeps going and it keeps renewing my confidence in it. So I wanted to do this video to show you that perhaps maybe you can save a bit of money when you're starting out to your home studio. Look for perhaps a second-hand laptop or computer, and I'll run through some of the minimum specs you should be looking for, because it can be a bit of a minefield in terms of figuring out what you need when you're looking at a slightly older second-hand machine. So here it is, the faithful machine there. It's my 2013 MacBook Pro, and I bought it second-hand myself actually, because when I started out recording, budget was low and I'd basically got through a couple of Windows machines and I was really losing faith with them. And I read a lot of things online saying, stay away from Windows, get yourself on a Mac. They're much more reliable and they'll last a lot longer. And I've been proven completely right with my MacBook Pro. So I bought it, it was probably a couple of years old when I bought it, which meant I got a lot of money off them because they are expensive new. And I know perhaps you're watching this thinking, oh, I'd love a MacBook for my home studio, but I really can't afford it. So secondhand is a great way to go, and that proves that it can be done. So firstly, let's address that question, Windows or Mac, the age-old question. And for me, I have to vouch for Macs personally because of what I said before. I had a couple of Windows machines before. I always struggled. I mean, this was a few years ago now, so I know I've heard from a lot of people that they've improved a great deal. But I just lost that trust. They had issues with latency despite downloading extra drivers. I had issues with them just not lasting that long, the build quality. And even though I saved a few £100s when I was buying them, it really came back to haunt me. The fact that the MacBook that I've had has lasted me getting on for 10 years without any problems whatsoever, it does pay for itself in the long run. And that means you can look secondhand. Yeah, the fact that it's made of solid metal just means that they last a long time. They're built to last, and unlike a lot of other Apple products where you may have heard that they kind of seem to self-destruct or stop working after a few years. I've heard that with iPhones, with iPads. They don't seem to follow that. Well, definitely not with these older MacBooks. They seem to be built to last a long time. They don't just suddenly stop working. I have heard some issues with people downloading new operating systems having issues, but for me, I've kept downloading new operating systems, and everything's kept working with it. I've literally just installed the new Ableton 11 on it, and that works absolutely fine. So no issues there, I can confirm. So if you're following this advice and you want to look for a old secondhand MacBook on eBay or wherever it may be, then what spec are you looking for? What do you need to be able to produce music at home? Well, the first thing to look for is the processor. I like to think of the processor as the laptop's brain. It's responsible for carrying out calculations and performing the tasks that a brain would do, and it's very important in music production in terms of making sure that the software, your DAW, your DAW, runs correctly and without any issues. So making sure you've got a decent processor is key. You will see when you look at the processor, you'll see a couple of things. Firstly, what you'll see is the number of cores. So you may see quad core, dual core, or just a single core. And what that does is by adding more and more cores, it's like adding more brains. Essentially, it allows the laptop to do more and more tasks at the same time, which is important when you're doing music production. So obviously, the more cores that you can get in your spec, the better. My one is a quad core processor. You'll also see a figure next to the processor spec, which will be a GHz or gigahertz, and that's the frequency. That basically tells you how quickly the brain of the laptop will be working. So again, the higher you can go with that, the better. I have got a 2.3 gigahertz processor in this machine. I tend to see the general recommendation is no less than 2.2 gigahertz. So if you look for that as a minimum, that should easily be a high enough frequency for the processor to run smoothly. And then finally with the processor, you'll see probably something that will say i5 or i7. With non-Apple machines, you may see AMD. This is basically to do with the manufacturer of the processor. So the i5, the i7, that's Intel. The I number is to do with the cache, and that's basically how much data can be stored for repetitive tasks. So there's a lot of repetitive tasks in music production. So the higher that I number you can get, the better. In this MacBook that I've been using, it's got an i7 processor. So all in all, that's a 2.3 gigahertz i7 quad-core processor that I've got in this machine. But if you look for a minimum of 2.2 gigahertz, i5 or above should be fine, just to play on the safe side. And yeah, then as many cores as you can get, really. Next, you've got the RAM. And no, I'm not talking about a small sheep. I'm talking about random access memory. And this is probably one of the most important things that you can look at when you're looking at laptop specs for music production. You'll see, I mean, an analogy I like to use basically when you're looking at different types of memory is you've got RAM, which is your short-term memory, and you've also got another memory figure, which is for your hard drive, and that's your longer-term memory. So if you think of the RAM as kind of your wallet, your short-term spending, something you can dip into every now and again when you just need a bit of money. And then the hard drive is the bank. That's where the money is saved for the long term. You can access it fairly easily, but you have to make a trip out. You can't just grab your wallet and use it. So think of that from the laptop point of view. If it wants to access something really quickly, then it looks into its wallet, which is the RAM. Hope you're following this. Or if it wants to access something that's stored a bit further back and isn't needed quite as quickly, then it'll look to its bank, which is the hard drive. I'll come on to the hard drive minimum spec in a bit. But for the RAM, again, as with all these things, the higher the number, the better. So you'll see a gigabyte number for the RAM. Really, you want to have more than 4 gigabytes. I'd say that's probably a little bit on the low side. Probably look for 8 gigabytes of RAM or more. This machine, my MacBook, has 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it's always run really smoothly with no issues. So again, the higher the better, but no less than 4. Then you've got your longer term memory, as I said, the kind of, if we imagine the RAM as the wallet, the short term memory bank, which is very important for music production. There's lots of need for that short term memory. You are also going to need long-term memory. And for anyone that's just getting into music production, it may shock you just how large the files are that are required for just a single song, really. Every track that you record, every repeat that you record will be stored, and it can get up to gigabytes pretty easily. So it is important to have enough storage. That said, I pretty much store all my files, all my plugins on an external hard drive. So don't stress too much about this, but if it's something that you want to have all your music stored on the laptop itself, then you are going to need quite a bit of space. And even if you're not, it's worth, as a safety net, having no less than, say, 250 gigabytes. You'll fill that probably fairly easily over a couple of years. I have got like a 4 terabyte external hard drive, so I know I'm never going to fill that, and that's got a really fast write time, so I can keep all my plugins, all my files on there, and just save the laptop's memory for running the software and keeping things nice and clean. I mean, I would recommend, if you can, keeping your laptop primarily for music production. Don't fill that memory with loads of files, other files. If you do video production or other things, try and keep it for music production so it runs as smoothly as possible. But to be honest, I've been using my laptop for pretty much everything over the last few years. I've probably been guilty of using it for a bit too much in terms of everyday tasks, and it still runs my DAW software perfectly fine. So don't worry too much about it. So as I say, I'm putting a minimum requirement here of the 256 is the standard kind of amount where you will see for a hard drive size. I'm putting that as a minimum, but really, you could get away with less if you're using an external hard drive, but it's up to you. And the final thing I want to talk about is probably screen size. Again, for me, it's not a massive issue. It's nice to have a larger screen when I'm traveling around in case I want to make music on the move. So I went for a 15-inch screen because I thought the 13-inch screen would be a little bit on the small side. To be honest, that can be got around pretty easily. When you're at home, you can buy a monitor for very cheap. Just plug in with a HDMI to a monitor. I use a sort of 23-inch monitor when I'm at home, but the laptop, I've got a 15-inch monitor on that. I wouldn't go any smaller. If you're trying to work on a 13-inch screen, then you may struggle when you're on the move if you want to carry on producing music on the move. But if you're going to be using it at home mostly and you can plug into a monitor, then it doesn't really matter. You might be able to get a higher spec laptop by going for a 13-inch screen on an older model, and then if you're going to use it primarily plugged into a monitor, then you may get away with it. But if you ever want to use it on the move, then probably go for a minimum of a 15-inch screen. So although the laptop or computer is probably the most important item in the modern home studio, you don't necessarily have to spend an absolute fortune to get a really good machine. And I would recommend potentially looking at a second-hand machine, even if you've got the money or you think you could afford a new one. The environmental benefits, potentially, you're helping out a fellow person by giving them a bit of money. Think about that. It will make you feel good. You obviously get the benefits of the kind of warranty on a new machine. So kind of weigh those two things up. Would you rather have the comfort of having a new machine and the warranty that goes with it, or would you rather save a bit of money that you can spend on other things in your studio? Because there'll be plenty of those other things that you want to spend money on as you start to build your studio and do more and more music production.